Thanks for coming today. This is our first capstone talk. In the past, we've had 3 separate sessions, and we've never sort of tried to push them together so that we can highlight what we each do as a section. We're here to talk about this guy today. Does anyone know who this is?
Sabu.
Not Ozzy. No. This guy is basically, at least in my world, the embodiment of evil in many ways. He's the leader of WALSEC. Have you ever heard of WALSEC? Anonymous. WALSEC is a subgroup of Anonymous. We're joined today by some experts in their fields to talk about how the Sabu story and the Anonymous story and the things that they've done over the past year and a half or so have led us to this point. In the case of Sabu, he was living a single father, unemployed, living in a housing project, wreaking havoc on multinational corporations because he didn't agree with some of the things they did. In most cases, Anonymous is basically an anarchist organization. They're doing it, they say, for political means. But as we see today, that may or may not be true. So we're joined today by Ronald Layton of the Secret Service, Jill McIntyre of Jackson Kelly, and via Skype, Marcus Rogers, who is at Purdue University. So, Dr. Rogers, are you ready?
I certainly am.
We'll let you go first since you're remote to us here.
Okay, and this is interesting, and these groups like Anonymous and WALSEC, we tend to think that there's something new. This isn't new within the hacker community. We can go back to the days of phone freaking. We had these ad hoc groups that popped up. So what's interesting is the amount of media coverage and the amount of attention they get, and they really like to think of themselves under the moniker of being hacktivists, and they're making some political statement, they're doing something, they're kind of the enforcement arm of we in the internet community who can't stand up for themselves, and they're given a lot of credibility where I'm not sure the credibility exists. There's a lot of this whole idea that they're somehow politically motivated and that they're anarchists. I'm going to argue that this is absolute nonsense. These are loosely affiliated groups of individuals which are primarily young, primarily very immature, and they're doing it mainly for the notoriety. That's the primary motivation for doing this. They pick sites that they are going to get them in the headlines, and this whole claim of being hacktivists and anarchists is really nothing more than, I would call it, this moral disengagement. What they're doing is they're trying to justify what they realize is deviant behavior, and they're trying to pretend that what they're doing has a greater cause, and I think under scrutiny that doesn't really hold up. So my opinion is this isn't anything new. It's a bunch of individuals with really no big structure. They're primarily immature and they tend to age out. And really, if the media wasn't giving this so much attention, I think we'd see these groups disappear very quickly. And that's my initial comments on this.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Jill, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. I wasn't following this story at all. I'd heard of Anonymous on the national news at night. But about March, I read a news story in the Charleston Gazette about the apprehension of Hector Monsiger. He'd been apprehended in a public housing development in New York City. And he was accused with his group of having compromised systems of Sony, banks, and other large corporations. And I said to myself, this is going to be a problem for business. And I thought, wonder how businesses are dealing with this. Well, I looked into it a little bit on the internet and discovered that businesses are now buying cyber liability policies. And I'm going to just run through very quickly with you what the business concerns are. Interestingly, I mentioned to Bill Gardner when I was talking to him about this story that Monsegur had caused billions of dollars worth of damage. And Bill said, you know, that's a little bit hard to measure. We're not really sure if he caused billions of dollars worth of damage. So I kind of wonder if Dr. Rogers is right. They're doing it for the notoriety rather than the money that they're making. Guy living in public housing, not probably making much money. But what he can do is interrupt my client's business. So I found myself reading from the 2010 Ponemon Institute study. And Ponemon is an institute that collects independent research on privacy, data protection, and information security policy. So they do their own research. They look for trends in practice and perception and potential threats. And they help businesses improve their security and deal with the problems that they face. So the 2010 study indicated that businesses incur about $214 worth of damage per compromised record. When you move on to, and the compromises happen in 4 basic ways. Lost or stolen portable devices, and that your laptop, your iPad, your iPod, software system failures, loss of paper records, and actual malicious attacks. Typically, a network insurance policy does not cover lost or stolen portable devices or loss of paper records. Go ahead to the next slide, Bill. The malicious attacks element of the damage being caused is on the rise. And the increase was, according to the study, up 43% from 2009. Malicious attacks up 43% in a year, 2009 to 2010. And the average damage per record flowing from a malicious attack is $318. So more damage being done on that end. There are 2 kinds of coverage that the underwriters think about. One is first-party insurance, and that means I am the injured party, I'm the damaged party, and I have the insurance policy that covers me for that damage. So there's first-party coverage, and there's third-party coverage. Third-party coverage would be somebody else looks to me and says, I was damaged because of something bad that happened on your network. They're a third party, they are damaged, but they're coming to me for reimbursement. So, quickly we'll run through them. Slide. Loss or corruption of data. And that would be attributable to viruses or malicious code entering your business network. Next, business interruption. If you have an attack on your network that you're not ready, willing, and able to correct quickly, go ahead, Bill, I'm just going to click each one.
Okay.
You're going to have to close down your business for a period of time. And you can get insurance coverage for that. Business interruption coverage, and specifically based on an attack that you've had. Next, cyber extortion. You may have a bad guy saying, if you don't pay me money, I'm going to bring your network down. Well, you can get insurance coverage for that would pay for the settlement of an extortion threat. Another, yeah, that's right. You can have a cost that arises out of a public relations nightmare that happens when your network goes down. So if you have to engage a public relations entity to help you improve your image and assure all your customers that your systems are secure and operating properly, you may have purchased insurance coverage that helps you pay for that public relations fix. You can also obtain coverage for criminal awards. So if you have a pot of money that is being offered for information leading to the apprehension of somebody who's compromising your system, you may be able to obtain, believe it or not, obtain coverage to fund that pool of money. Cyber terrorism. Now we have the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act of 2002, and it deals with nuclear, biological, chemical, and radiological attacks. So if you have cyber terrorists attacking a private company or a government network, and it's going to lead to an act of terrorism under that act, you could have coverage that applies specifically to the language of the act. Next one, identity theft. If you have a business that handles people's personal information and your network is compromised and that person's personal information is misappropriated, you may want to set up a system by which your customer can contact you and say, somebody's using my personal information, you gotta help me out with this, it's your fault, can we find them, can I get a new credit card, can I get a new social security number? So it's a program that a business might set up to deal with identity theft that happens because of a breach on its system. Now let's go to the third party risks. Breach of privacy due to theft of data. You may have, as a business, a user of your network who's injured by a privacy invasion, and they would have a cause of action against you because you allowed your network to be infiltrated, and they suffered harm because of it. It's not always a constitutional interest. Sometimes it's just a harm to the person, personal injury, but you can have claims arising out of that. Next one, transmission of a virus. If something nefarious in your system gets into, in the business's system, gets into the customer's system, and the customer transmits the virus, then the customer is going to be held accountable, perhaps, and come back to you as the originator of the virus. Finally, two more. Failure of security causing the system to be interrupted. So you have an individual or a business that needs to use their bank account, and because of a threat to your system or security breach on your system, it's unavailable to them. They may have consequential damages, a deal that they were going to do that they needed that system for, and they may sue the business to recover those consequential damages. And finally, you can very often have copyright and trademark infringements happening on a website for which the business may be held liable if the infringement is due to some sort of data breach. So I was interested to find these things out. I think that this coverage was instituted around 1997. It wasn't available before then. It probably wasn't necessary before then. The market is market-driven. I know that insurance companies write their policies so that they make money. I tried to get a copy of an application for a cyber liability insurance policy and was not able to do that until today because I would have perhaps highlighted some of the information that they're looking for. I know that Wells Fargo here in town is an insurance agent that's offering that kind of policy, as is Commercial Insurance Services in Charleston. They base the price of the policy and the underwriting will make clear what you're going to owe on the size of your company, the amount of data that you have stored, the number of people who have access to your data, what your security policies are, so they're going to inquire into all that stuff, whether your data is encrypted, and whether you have an actual loss history that you may or may not have reported to anybody. You can't make a mistake on an insurance application without a risk of losing the coverage later. So if you're thinking about or advising someone to obtain cyber liability coverage, know that all of those things will be looked at and scrutinized in the underwriting process in order to come up with your premium.
Thanks, Ron, would you like to address the law enforcement side?
Sure. You know what? It's hard for me to stay seated talking about this kind of stuff. It's like being behind the podium. I don't like to do that either. I like to walk around and talk a little bit. So this is going to drive you crazy, by the way. All right.
That's not a drive, that's just a short putt.
Awesome. Okay. So, you know, you come to these conferences, and they're great forums for information sharing and networking and that kind of stuff. And those things are really important because that's how we learn more, by meeting people and, hey, did you look at it this way? Hey, did you look at it that way? That kind of stuff. How many people, just a quick show of hands, have been to Black Hat DEF CON? Okay. Did you learn anything there? What'd you learn?
Just mainly the same with a lot of people that I met that have been with the network of people just like we do here, and we'll work with them on different projects and whatnot.
Ah, that's a repeating theme. It will be. What would you get out of it?
Basically the same thing.
Ah.
I actually learned a little bit more from just being in the hallways talking to people than I did in one.
Yeah, exactly. How many folks who have been there think that that contributed to your education regarding why these guys do this stuff? Quite a bit? Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to get the knowledge out of a textbook. That's great, and I'm certain that this stuff's great. But until you go and you immerse yourself in that environment, you get a real feel for the different cultures and subcultures within this community. And what I wanted to do is associate myself with the comments of Dr. Rogers just by saying, this is not new. None of this stuff is new. These guys are the same types of guys in terms of personalities that have always gotten into this kind of stuff. And so from an enforcement perspective, let's say that we've got someone who is interested in illicit insider trading. Let's take another person and say that they are a dealer of cocaine. Let's take another person and say they're a dealer of something I'm intensely interested in, high quality counterfeit money. And let's take another person and say that they are a hacker or data broker. What's the common theme that runs through that entire class of knucklehead?
Is that antisocial behavior?
Okay, one for antisocial behavior. Who else?
They all have goals and means that benefit each other.
Who else?
Information.
Money?
Information.
Money, yes.
Yeah, so here's the deal. On all of this stuff, I've been in law enforcement since 1986, and I am sure that any person who locks people up for a living, particularly if you work narcotics and those types of things, this is something that you don't hear about a lot in this community, but it is the absolute truth when dealing with these people. It is an addiction to quick money. That's the deal. If I can spend a weekend and turn over 50 grand and put that in my account or my bank account or my pocket, that's what I'm interested in. Again, whether it's the person who is involved in drug dealing or illegal insider trading or a data broker, that's the deal, and that's the motivation, the turnover of quick money. And so what's interesting is the three things that folks are interested in who engage in this type of activity, generally money, greed, and power. For folks like Sabu and everybody's familiar with, like Kevin Mitnick, those characters, yes, these things still hold true, money, greed, power, but I would say that there is one other thing that is starting to be the new addiction to quick money, and that's quick media attention.
Notoriety.
Yes, it is quick, ongoing media attention. So from my perspective, I see this as pervasive, moving from a terrorism milieu to a cyber milieu to just the person who just calls themselves a hacktivist. We just are finishing the G8, which was held at Camp David, and the event that was held in Chicago, which was NATO. How many times do you think that particular event was attempted to be penetrated? Right.
NATO was constant.
Exactly. Absolutely constant.
And it was all over the media.
And it was all over the media. Exactly. Question, sir?
I was just going to state, I mean, I don't want to throw you off. I don't think Kevin Mitnick's kind of fit that role. I think he was very intrigued at the way things worked and wanted to work backwards. I don't think he ever did that for financial means, but more for gaining intelligence. I think the current actors are much more geared towards monetary gain, but I don't think you really consider that.
So the comment for folks that couldn't hear is that Mr. Mitnick perhaps was not, he was not interested in monetary gain. It is difficult to determine what's in somebody's head. You can kind of look at behaviors and then make some assessment regarding behavior. But I will say that there are many a career criminal who started off to do exactly what you said, and then they found out this is a good deal. And so did they end up staying and continuing to perform the activity because it was a good deal, or is it the original motivator? Fair enough?
Yeah.
So it still, in this environment, comes down to the whodunit, to the attribution. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about in addition to some of the things that I've mentioned is the law enforcement approach of kind of flying at this post-event, meaning the bank has been robbed and then the cops show up and start to figure out what happened, working it backwards. Or, in the case of our current study, do you think that it might be different if you're working the same kind of case and you have an informant? You think that might be different? Much different. And if so, how? How would it change the direction of the investigation? Would I have to tailor resources a little differently? If you don't know exactly what happened, you've got to kind of cast a wide net. But if you've got an informant, it's much different. So those were just opening comments, and I will sit down.
We're having problems contacting Boris, so we'll wear dual hats for a second. First of all, thanks for my employer, Flaherty, Sensabaugh, and Manasseh for sponsoring this lunch today. Everyone should go back and thank Mr. Wakefield in the back there. But it's kind of interesting that how we ended up, not just business, but as a community. We all became fascinated how someone, at the point in time they started doing these things, could tweak the noses of law enforcement in multinational corporations using 10-year-old vulnerabilities. Apparently, somebody needs to secure the frickin' network. SQLI is ancient. We don't see a lot of new research on SQLI. In fact, I don't think we see any. It's pretty easy to defend against. But yet, this guy and his people he hung out with on 4chan were able to bring Sony basically to its knees. Oh, there's Boris. Boris! Can you hear me? I'll be a little bit more bombastic than I am. Boris? I don't think he's on, though. Okay. So, from an InfoSec point of view, how do we get here is a very trying question. We also don't want this guy to stand for us because we're not doing the same sort of work. We're defending networks. This guy's attacking networks. Since I have some of the rock stars of InfoSec in this room, does anyone want to say anything before I can ramble on without notes or slides? Come on, people.
I just to kind of throw a question at you, keep this going a bit. A 10-year-old vulnerability, secure your freaking network. Completely agree. People who work in the private sector are quite bright. Why don't they do it?
It's a good question.
I don't know. Anybody have any?
If you're not seeing an attack, why are you going to secure your network? Why are you going to spend the money to make your network more secure when you've already proven with your previous track record that your network is secure because you haven't been attacked yet? That's the unfortunate problem that a lot of companies were seeing. That's what Sony saw. Sony put the website out there, and it worked. No one broke it. And so they were like, fine, we're good, we're golden, let's quit.
If I have a $10 million enterprise, does it make sense for me to spend $15 million to secure that enterprise?
It definitely does, but I think that.
It does?
No, I mean, I think, you know, they need to secure it, but I think most organizations are I think geared more for profitability than they are recursion of holding their data.
Here, I have a highly technical question. How much money does it cost to secure against SQLI?
What's the cost of
For
it?
programmer's time.
Yeah,
Zero.
yearly salary?
Training, I mean,
Well, that's one of the
it
reasons
just
we have
requires
these
some training.
conferences, is, you know, one of the reasons we come together and talk about this stuff is so we understand what the risk is. So that we can, you know, secure against 10-year-old vulnerabilities. But you should also be securing against vulnerabilities that are coming out now. The idea, you know, bad guys talk to each other, we need to talk to each other too. So that's one of the reasons we have these conferences.
It's Mark White. Can I throw in a behavioral sciences take on that?
Sure thing.
One of the biggest reasons why we don't secure things the way we're supposed to is because it's never going to happen to us. Bad things happen to other people. From a forensic psychology perspective, this is why people engage in risky behaviors, because it's never going to happen to you. So that's the reason why a lot of if you talk to these IT security people, oh yes, we know that somebody's going to get hacked, but it's not going to be us. So it's a matter of what we refer to as a cognitive bias. It's not going to happen to us, it happens to somebody else. And those decision makers actually have that in their mind when they're making these decisions about budgets and what we should do.
Boris, are you there? Or are you just sending me messages so everyone can see it?
Of course, that's the same justification that 12-year-old daughter makes, so that she doesn't have to clean her room. Kind of sad. I'll go back.
Yes, ma'am.
Could somebody talk about what Sabu did to bring Sony to its knees in a more technical way, and what the authorities did to identify him in a more technical way?
Sabu and his group found multiple websites that were exposed to 10-year-old vulnerabilities to the SQL injection, and kept persistently going after them, bringing them down, bringing their website down, and ultimately it ended up resulting in a compromise of the Sony PlayStation Network, which is for the people that have the PlayStation 3 to go in, and it's an online commerce place where people can buy things and buy games, buy downloads, stuff like that. And that was compromised, and information was leaked from there. So that's what brought Sony down the 19 or so times in the course of a few months. As for law enforcement, I mean, I'm not really sure on that part. From what I've read, I mean, what they did was they eventually, he leaked too much personal information into his chat logs and things like that, that the FBI was able to identify who he was. So once they identified who he was, they were able to go, and then through interviewing, through other processes, they were able to turn him into an informant that allowed the rest of the group that he was leading to be brought down.
Boris Herdlick, are you there, or are you cyber stalking us?
I am here.
Oh, thank God. It's the voice of God.
Apologies, the time difference. I wasn't sure. I wasn't actually sure what time this was scheduled for. Apologies.
Yeah, right, Morris.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, but just at a high level, that's what Sabu had done and what law enforcement had done. I'm sure people can go into more detail about the actual, the investigation that went on, and more detail into the actual attacks that he performed.
So what you're saying is there's a group of people poking at the server, just poking.
Yes, they were poking at the server constantly. Sabu was kind of the ringleader. He was the one that went out and found the information, or other people would give him the information, and then he would kind of coordinate attacks against them.
Does Sony know it's happening?
Sony didn't know it was happening initially. They knew it was happening, they took care of it, but they didn't. Then it happened again on another part of their site or another part of their business. And this happened repeatedly over the course of several months.
And in the case of some of Anonymous's actions, it's not so much that they're focused on this particular group. It's let's go ahead and scan a whole lot of people, find as many low-hanging fruits as we can, target that, and we can come up with a political reason for it later.
Sony was a very easy one because they were, I think it was the WikiLeaks stuff, something to do with WikiLeaks that gave them a very good reason to target them. But then they targeted other companies that had nothing to do with anything like that.
Well, I think in the case of Sony, it was the guy who jailbroke his phone and
Is that
decided
Geohot?
he wanted to jailbreak his PS3.
Yeah.
Sony sued him, so therefore they had a political reason for going after Sony.
I was thinking PayPal with the WikiLeaks.
That's true too.
So that was another company that was targeted by the same group of people.
Mr. Spurlick, would you like to add something to this conversation you haven't heard yet?
I'm just catching the back end, so I'm not sure where we are.
Well, we've talked about who Anonymous is and what they did in these 2-year-old exploits. Dr. Rogers was saying they were doing this mainly for attention more than for money. What's your take on that?
Same. From that perspective, I seem to agree. There really wasn't any. We really didn't see any extortion. We really didn't see any funds transfer type of attacks. You want to turn me down a little bit, or is it me? The echo?
No, it's I'm sorry. This room is acoustically.
You're just too loud.
You're just too
Well, as long as you hear me, it's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna turn you on this tab.
There you go.
No, as long as you hear me, it's fine. So from that perspective, it was pretty much to get attention, and I don't think. Obviously, Sony was a pretty big target, and from the perspective of Sony, the threat surface is just so, the threat landscape was just so huge. They have hundreds of subsidiaries, so it wasn't. I don't think it would have taken any advanced techniques to get into the systems that they did.
So where does Anonymous come from? Does anyone want to answer that question? Where did
4chan?
4chan.
To a degree.
So what's 4chan?
What
I call it the armpit of the internet.
Yeah, I was going to call it.
it's Moss Isley.
Actually, WellSec started on 4chan. Anonymous was way before the whole 4chan thing.
Well,
When we think Anonymous, when we think originally Anonymous with ZFO, we think those types of groups. WellSec had originally started on 4chan.
so I'm not sure about that or not. See, I understand the whole anonymous meme, the name anonymous. Essentially on these image boards, when you post, you generally post anonymously. So there's slowly started to be a joke formed around it saying, oh yeah, Anonymous gave me that, or as if Anonymous, which was just the name it put there whenever someone posted, was a real person. And it kind of built up from there.
The anonymous movement started to gain more ground though with their attacks against the Church of Scientology as well.
Though we should keep in mind that just because somebody says anonymous doesn't mean the people who are doing anything to better as anonymous,
right.
There's checks on a Church of Scientology aren't necessarily the same people who are anonymous doing the other types of attacks. Yeah. It's not one cohesive organization. It's basically a banner meme that people use for types of attacks. Yep. And I'd say as time went by, it's even less really anonymous because these people aren't anonymous, they're pseudonymous. They'll actually tie it to themselves. Part of the idea of anonymous originally was none of us actually have names, we're all doing this group action. If they truly remained anonymous and they didn't dump information about themselves and they didn't seek glory, they probably wouldn't have got caught.
They all started becoming WallSec, and there's all these sect movements out there.
It's that notoriety that you were talking about. That's what they're looking for now. They want to claim these actions as theirs. They want the media to draw attention to them. Anonymous is great, but Anonymous is a giant cloud. If anyone's read, I think Josh Corman's blog entries and Forbes articles on just dissecting Anonymous, you understand that Anonymous is really just this giant cloud, like Adrian was saying, that just accepts anyone and everyone. If you want to do something, do it under the brand of Anonymous. That's fine, go for it. Have fun. But the LawSec, the anti-sec movement, the other groups like Team Poison and all these groups that grew out of Anonymous wanted the notoriety and wanted to have a more personal agenda of what they were trying to do. And that's how these groups grew.
So what makes them different than terrorists?
Well, they're not blowing things up necessarily.
Well, are they?
That's,
They're still costing people money.
I'm not going to put them in the same category as, someone who causes...
Terrorism here. Can I jump in? I've written book chapters and read articles on this whole concept. So let me caution everyone. There's a specific definition of a terrorist. A terrorist doesn't just do something for the heck of doing something. A terrorist does something is politically motivated and is designed to cause terror. And it's usually designed to cause terror, so you can change some type of a political situation, you can change a government, and you can make some kind of a statement that's going to have some type of a cultural change. These people aren't even close to doing that.
But they have the desire to do that, though. Some of them do have the desire. They try to take claim for the actions that happened last year in Egypt and in the Middle East. They try to take claim for all of that type of stuff. So while for the most of them, they don't want to be a terrorist. Some of them actually do want to be terrorists.
I doubt that very highly. Simply because somebody wants to take credit for it doesn't mean they've actually done it. And the groups, the people that are involved in these groups, we've been following this group since 2003, doing research on them. They're not highly technical people. They're not, a lot of them aren't even really politically active in anything other than, that looks like a great thing to do. Let's send a million pizzas to the police chief in that town. That's not political.
What was the one?
I have to disagree with that.
Jeremy June. Jeremy, not who, sorry, Jeremy. Jeremy Hammond.
Yeah, Jeremy Hammond was one of those people, though. And within the United States, he was out of Chicago. He was part of LawSec. He was one of these people that actually went to these rallies, actively tried to. He had arrest records and all this stuff. He wanted. So I agree with you 100% that not everyone in there wants to do it, but there are these few key individuals that do want to do that type of behavior, and that they have started to influence what Anonymous is doing.
Well, just to add to that, wait a second. Just to add to that, we looked at during the actual Egypt situations, they were actively targeting the Egyptian government, all of their websites to topple them and take them down. So that to me would be a definition of terrorism.
It's not terrorism.
So like about the United States government and the fact of the overthrow them, it's not terrorism?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Not much you think that it caused terror.
His question was, if he actively targets the United States government's computer resources in an attempt to try to take them down, is that not defined as terrorism?
No, not even close.
I'd say they're more of a noyist.
Terrorism if you look at the definitions of terrorism, okay, it's to create terror, it's to create fear, it's directed not at the target, it's directed at the people watching the event. If you look at the blowing up planes, it wasn't designed to necessarily kill the people, it's designed to get the reaction from the public. It usually has to be tied to some political, it has to be tied to some change, you're trying to change a philosophy. Simply attacking a target, the U.S. government's systems isn't a terrorist attack, that's attacking the U.S. government's systems.
I think we have a question here of defining the term terrorism. I think that Dr. Rogers is coming of it from an academic point of view, and you all may be coming of it from something that's just subversive. Being subversive does not equal terrorism.
Most acts of war start out with a group taking out the communication channels for their enemy.
Yeah, so what these denial of service attacks, they're causing panic amongst businesses. I mean, if you look at InfoSec dollars spent in the last year or two from these attacks going on, I think that represents panic. I mean, dollar figures have gone up, spending has gone way up. Every company is getting pen tests because they want to find out their vulnerabilities. So, I mean, there's the terror that's being caused by their activities, by the activities of these malicious hackers.
Just further add to that, what about government officials that are calling Assange a terrorist? He published secret data to the internet that he illegitimately got from Manning a terrorist? Did he mean to cause terror on the United States government? No. He's being charged as a terrorist. I think the definition is crazy. Because if you look at the LawSec movement, they targeted a number of law enforcement officials. They published all of their social security numbers online. So they're going to release more unless the United States government met their demands. I mean, to me that sounds like terrorism.
It's a terrorist action.
So if anything, I think the
threshold do I have to go over before that's considered terrorism? I mean, these groups are actively going after the United States government, actively going over governments that they oppose in order to change the way that they think, and they do it through fear. So to me, that's a pinnacle definition of terrorism. Spending 5 years working for the NSA.
What's the political or ideological change they're trying to actually make? Grabbing headlines is not an ideological motive.
So for the Egyptian government, it was to topple and overthrow the Egyptian government.
same with the Syrian government.
Right, the Syrian government, when they did when they kept targeting
state officials, it was for the Occupy Wall Street movement at the time, so that they can get formal change around Wall Street officials and the corrupt practices that they do there.
See, and this is where, yeah, and, you know, and this is obviously, you know, these are very vague definitions and there's overlaps because one person's terrorist is another person's soldiers, another person's, activist is another person's civil activist. So these are very, I agree, these are very, very fuzzy delineations.
Okay, I think
Can we
that's we can
take
on
this
that.
to another point? So, does cyber war exist? Are these people perpetrating cyber war?
I hate that term.
I know. That's the reason I bring it up.
Thank you.
Nobody wants to talk about it.
Well, if there's some type of nation-state background, it might fall in that definition.
Especially in the cases as of Dave was saying in Syria and some of the other, in Egypt, maybe that does fall under the definition of cyber.
I think, I mean, when I think of cyber war, I personally think of countries attacking other countries. And that's my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, hacker groups hacking other hacker groups, I guess, could be too.
If they were states
Jester and everybody else going on. Traditionally, I think of it from a military standpoint, it's, pretty cut and dry when you have a different government, going after another government.
So what makes this guy different than the Jester? Do you know who Jester is? Mr. Hackett, would you like to tell us who the Jester is?
Jester is a guy that targets Al-Qaeda websites, anything that kind of supports terrorism, he tends to go and try to take it down. The last couple of weeks, I don't know what the deal was with him, but he's definitely lost some of his support. In my opinion, some of his recent actions of disappearing and coming back.
So what makes his actions any different than Sabu and Walsek's actions?
He doesn't target corporations
Well,
that are within
That's
the
not
United
true.
States. That's not true?
He supports corporations that support terrorism.
Yeah, I don't think his actions really are any different.
They're not really different.
From a truly action perspective, and not considering the ideological beliefs, it's the same exact. It's the same exact steps.
The only difference is that he doesn't openly release the information that he states that he obtains.
But he's done that though. He did that with like Sabu. He posted on his blog all of Sabu's information months before it was confirmed that he was actually turned an informant. So he does do that same type of activity. And so Boris is right. I mean, there's no difference in the actual activity.
With his actions. I don't think there's any difference other than, some of the issues around disclosure of the information he obtains, but the only thing that differentiates him from other activists that people see is that he's not targeting us.
Yeah. So you would say...
That's that, Phil.
Go ahead.
Hacky, want to tell him about your experience?
What's that?
Hacky, you want to tell him about your experience with the Jester?
Yeah, with the QR code, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I put the Wi-Fi QR code up. I grabbed my boss's smartphone and said, I'm going to see what this thing does. And scanned it. And then, I guess the next couple of days or so, he released what it actually did. And supposedly that attack, he directed you to a website with a script to check your phone for a Twitter account. And if you were one of his targeted Twitter accounts, he dumped all your contacts, etc. I don't think my boss's stuff got dumped down or anything.
But that's still not the point. He put the link up there for the public.
Right, yeah, the link was up there and anyone could hit it. So and that targeted everyone on Twitter, essentially.
Yep.
Point to Boris.
We probably should wrap this up. I'd like to get back through some of the different panelists and talk. Do you all have anything to add at this point? So is the...
It's very difficult for me to not get into these. Yeah. Because we don't have the time, and I'm a little too argumentative for this subtle group.
Let's go to the other building. We got plenty of time over
But
there.
I will say this. When people throw around the terrorism word, it depends on where you sit. I'm a United States law enforcement agent, so you know where I'm going to sit. But I'm also an academic. I will tell you that terrorism in the literature first surfaced
in 66 AD with a sect known as the Sicarii. And so what we are really talking about, if we go 3 levels deeper, is a question of taxonomy. And what behavior are we attributing to what action? That's important because our laws drive what we can do to you based on what you've done and the applicable statutes. That's where this should start. And I'm going to leave it at that.
And I got a quick comment. I love that. I think that's a great segue. And I think this is really one of the big issues we have when we're looking at these groups. How do we define them? We define them by the structure of the group, by the attacks that they use, by the targets that they target, or by the inferred motivations. And that's not an easy question. And this is something we really wrestle with.
Well, the problem with those classifications, if you just look at anonymous, there isn't a single classification they follow.
Agreed. Agreed.
But how's that any different than anything else? Most of the world is unstructured data. It's not supposed to fit in a box. So sometimes we look at each other like it's supposed to fit.
Well, we've also got a unique phenomenon here where we have a group, it's anonymous, and they're fluid. It's not the same people on every attack. This is a new concept that comes out of the nature of the virtual environment. We have these loose-knit groups that can come together, be opportunistic, disappear, and then reappear, but the actual structure of the group is not the same every attack. That's unique.
And if there was systematic cohesion, this would be a lot easier.
Agreed.
But there's not.
Yep. We have to live with that. So that's just something we're going to have to learn to deal with. I agree.
If we define state-sponsored attacks on information infrastructure that are using sophisticated methods to break in and decrypt as acts of war or cyber terrorism, isn't that what our signals intelligence program is all about? Isn't that what we are doing? And so how do we create a standard that we define what we are doing as in the interest of national security, but those, the Chinese, the Eastern Europeans, whomever doing it against us, are committing acts that may put us in a hot war?
Well, I think that the DoD has begun to position themselves as saying, you attack our critical infrastructure, we'll drop a bomb down your smokestack, basically. So they've now stepped forward and said, yes, we do have some sort of cyber war capacity. As to what that is, and it's behind the shadows. Of course, NSA and other intelligence agencies are out there defending our digital borders, but none of that's in the open, so we really don't know, other than what they tell us in advance. There's a lot of very smart people there too, so I feel pretty safe that we were in pretty good hands. And
Me too.
I don't know any more than maybe you read in Wired magazine, but we have been collecting secure data from other nations for quite a long time and are continually seeking to decrypt and gain intelligence from that information. Information we've not always secured just because it's passing through the normal channel. We view that as appropriate intelligence activity.
Yeah, well, we should. I think that we're stupid not to, because that's what our adversaries are doing.
Well,
and I'm saying, as an old country systems administrator, I'm not really,
old country
I've
systems
never worked
administrator?
in the shadowy parts of the government. But, there's a reason for those programs, and basically it's so we can keep a step ahead of those guys.
Do we still expel spies?
Where do we put them on the payroll?
I wish we should still execute spies. We haven't even dealt with the notion of saboteur here. We've jumped straight into terrorists without dealing with vandal and saboteur, which may, I think, be more appropriate terminology for much of what we've been discussing.
Well, I really didn't want this to turn into a discussion of cyber war and what is terrorism, but I guess that's the natural progression as you have these discussions. Jill, you have
it will always eventually spawn into that type of conversation because U.S. government's classified anonymous terrorism, right? Every time we see it, well, I don't know if it's the U.S. government from the perspective of the media. The media is labeled anonymous as terrorist.
Is that from anonymous basically positioning themselves to be labeled themselves as terrorists, or?
No, they've always labeled themselves as hackers, haven't they?
I would assume, based upon their many, many YouTube videos.
Isn't that just the media is trying to get the attention of people? So
What's
they're
the
using
media say about cyber criminals? They call them hackers. What's a
They call them crims.
Well, if you label them terrorists, you don't have to allow them any form of due process in your investigative efforts as well. And that is, I think, as much the motivation as anything else. You don't have to deal with the niceties of things like warrants if you're dealing with terrorists.
Jill, do you have anything to add before we take this down the rat hole any further?
I think we need to go our respective ways. I think we have programming in the InfoSec side, on the InfoSec side at 2, and our electronic discovery programming continues here now, with Craig Ball continuing his discussion and moving on to search.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and for Dr. Rogers for Skyping in, and for Boris joining us as well. I'd like to thank the sponsor, Clarity Since Bob Manasseh, who sponsored this this first sort of capstone event. I hope you all don't leave mad. There is snacks over in the other building, and we will continue with our InfoSec talks at 1 o'clock. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Have a great conference.
Apologies for dialing in late.
Okay, it's okay. I'll get with you later, dude.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Morris.